Half of the season has passed, and by now, people were split into two groups of thought about the Cavaliers. They either looked a lot better than they were due to beating up on lesser teams, or they had yet to even reach their full potential that AI and LeBron could unleash. Yes, they've got the best record in the conference. Yes, they have one of the best records in the NBA, and yes, they have two MVP players playing at an MVP level. However, to this point, they failed to consistently match the other top teams in the league. To add to that, there seems to be only one other real championship contender in the Eastern Conference, causing many to believe that even if the Cavs made it to the finals, they'd surely be exposed. In response to this, for the remainder of the season, James and Iverson set out to become one of the most unstoppable tag teams in NBA history, much like Wade and James had aimed to be in the years before. They get off to a great start to the second half of the season by just narrowly edging a win against the Chicago Bulls, who they were brutally beaten by on opening night. The tables are completely turned, as half of a season together has taught James and Iverson how to play off of one another, which was a challenge at the beginning since both were so used to having to carry the load on their own. Instead of waiting until after the All-Star break to go on the second half runs most teams end up going on, they seize the moment. In 11 games before the All-Star break, the Cavaliers win 9 of them. But that's not the best part. In those 9 wins, 8 of them were blowouts. Yes, the Cavs won those games by an average of 23.5 points per game. Naysayers try to say that most of the teams the Cavs beat were subpar, and while this is sorta true, the Cavs did manage to blow the Spurs out by nearly 30 points, so now the league has a real reason to fret. When James was in his first run with the Cavaliers, and they'd go on these type of streaks, a lot of people could chalk it up to the fact that they were just a regular season team, and you just knew that you could count on LeBron to be on an island by himself when the playoffs came around. However, this time, James had Iverson by his side spitting fire with him, and there's legitimate reason to be worried. But then, they're reminded of reality. The Warriors' dominance has begun to become commonplace, especially after their 73-win season, and while so many are infatuated with the rise of the Cavaliers, Golden State delivers a swift reminder just how much better they are than the rest of the league by blowing out San Antonio by 31. Almost as a side note, they've now topped the power rankings for 22 straight weeks, so at this point, the games after All-Star break seem like nothing more than a formality. The Cavs, looking as good as they do, simply have no challenge to offer Golden State in the 7-game series. For the rest of the season, virtually the only games that mean anything to Cleveland are the matches left against Chicago, and they finish with an even 2-2 split for the season series, setting up the stage for the perfect Eastern Conference Final series, as Wade and LeBron will now surely see each other for the first time in the playoffs. The Warriors, however, win the rest of their 2 matches against San Antonio to complete the season sweep, their biggest challenge in the West, and as the playoffs get underway, the only question really is who Golden State will be playing in the NBA Finals. So to wrap the season up, Cleveland ends with a record of 57-25, good enough for first in the Eastern Conference and second best in the league. Compare this to how the actual 07 Cavs did. They went 50-32, so having Allen Iverson push this roster to 7 more wins. But even funnier, back in 07, there wasn't even an Eastern Conference team that had more than 53 wins. The West had 3 of those. LeBron has another demigod season, putting up averages of 25.6 points, 7.7 rebounds, and 7.6 assists a game, a near triple-double. However, the Warriors had another historic season winning 68 games, and now own 2 of the top 10 records in NBA history, so Stephen Curry comes away with another MVP. And just some fun stats for the season, Ben Simmons took home Rookie of the Year, and without Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook was able to get his team to the playoffs, again averaging a near triple-double, but his points were surprisingly low to have lost Kevin Durant. A look at the official standings for the year, the East is noticeably missing the Indiana Pacers and the New York Knicks, 2 teams that made key additions and were expected to be amongst the best teams in the East. About the only surprise in the West is that the Mavericks missed the playoffs after adding Barnes and Bogut. And so, the playoffs began. These playoffs weren't as anticipated because the Warriors were just so head and shoulders above everyone else with their additions to Kevin Durant. They managed to handily defeat the Cavaliers and Spurs every time they met, and those were about the only teams that were expected to be able to compete with them for a championship. And fittingly, the playoff starts with a very predictable Warriors sweep, as they have even less trouble handling the Rockets without Dwight Howard. The Spurs, however, noticeably struggle to put the Pelicans away, that series going 6. On the other side of the bracket, the Cavs meet the Celtics yet again in the playoffs and are able to hold them off in a pretty uneventful 6-game series. But in the surprise of the year, the Bulls are ousted by Toronto in the first round. Chicago only manages to win 2 games as a lack of floor spacing finally catches up with them. It's a well-known fact that the game slows down in the playoffs, and there is no version of a half-court offense that consistently works well with Rondo having no shooters to penetrate and pass to. And so, yet again, the league is robbed of a Wade vs. LeBron playoff series, and the Cavs now have a pretty clear path to the NBA Finals. Back to the West, for the second round, the Spurs tighten up as they are able to write a perfect defensive plan to shut Westbrook's team out of the game, and no one player can beat the Spurs, so OKC is ousted in 5. But then, the Warriors show their first sign of stumbling. They are very nearly beaten by the Los Angeles Clippers of all people in the 7-game series. Luckily, Golden State had worked for home court advantage and are able to handily defeat the Los Angeles Clippers in the 7th game at Oracle. However, in that series, Golden State shows their one weakness, their lack of dominance in the paint. Letting Andrew Bogut go and replacing him with West wasn't a bad move, but Bogut was such an integral part of their inside presence that letting him go would prove costly. Defensive Player of the Year DeAndre Jordan, who also averaged 13.4 rebounds a game in the regular season, is able to control the paint even without major scoring contributions. Even though it wouldn't be enough, it showed Golden State wasn't invincible going into the series with San Antonio. Meanwhile, the East is pretty boring as usual. Now that Chicago's gone, Cleveland all but cakewalks through the East. LeBron gets to face his old Miami team, but since there's no Dwayne Wade there, it's rather melodramatic, and the Cavs win another 6-game series. They move on to face Toronto in yet another melodramatic Eastern Conference playoff series, and oust them in only 5 games, as the Cavs rightfully take their place as Eastern Conference champions. But in the West, things kind of get interesting. Golden State cruised through the entire year, exactly how people thought they would. Curry, Thompson, and Durant were able to put up their regular numbers, even David West pitched in a cool 12 points per game, and Green nearly averaged a triple-double. Everything was cool, their starters simply replaced the production of the 5 players they lost in order to sign Kevin Durant. However, the one thing they couldn't replace? Size. The combination of Gasol and Aldridge down low, mixed with Kawhi Leonard's defensive prowess and ball movement of the Spurs overall, was just too much for Golden State to handle. Their loss of depth and size gave the Spurs all the advantage they needed to beat them in a series where the pace slows down. The passing of Gasol had fit snug and tight with what the Spurs were doing, as they upset the Warriors in only 5 games in the first real drama of the NBA season. And suddenly, it looked like Cleveland may just have a shot. Just maybe. All season long, it had been said that no matter what Cleveland did, they weren't going to be able to handle Golden State in a series, and yet they didn't even make it. And as some cynical fans had long ago predicted, adding another quote-unquote choker to a choking roster wasn't going to get them to the promised land. And, well, they were right. Instead, the 07 Cavs would get a rematch against the Spurs, a second chance to prove that with some help, maybe they could have been NBA champions. And the thing that scared people the most is that although the Cavaliers were still largely outclassed by the Spurs as a whole, asking James and Iverson to be great just 4 more times for a championship wasn't necessarily a difficult thing for them to do. But remember, the Spurs' greatness had long been overshadowed by how good Golden State had been. We often forget that because the Warriors have raised the bar in the West, the Spurs are often right there with them doing amazing things in their own right. And now, the Spurs would have the opportunity to add a 6th championship to their dynasty. But the question still remained, would merely adding Allen Iverson to this Cavs roster be enough to propel them past the new-look Spurs? It might have worked in 2007, but probably not for this stacked Spurs roster. As always, leave your prediction, and in the next video, we'll be getting an NBA Finals edition of NBA2K What If Scenarios.